Another cost of monopoly power is what economists call X inefficiency, so like a generic term for additional inefficiency. And this talks about the fact that if you have monopoly power, you're just not as a you don't run your business as well as you should. If you have lots of competition, then you're forced to keep your costs under control. You're forced not to be wasteful. But if you have no competition, then you don't have to be that careful. And so you can have your workers not work as hard. You rely on, again, your high profits to compensate for your inefficient types of operations. So you might tend to overspend in many areas in operations, not finding the most efficient supplier of materials. You might give your employees more benefits than they would normally get. Have bloated salaries, too many perks, things like that. Take longer lunch hours, get to work a little bit later and leave a little bit earlier. And we sort of solve this with companies like maybe the telephone company. Go back to the 1970s, we had no cell phones. And if you want to make a long distance phone call, which is pretty much anywhere outside your local area, you had to go through one company, AT&T, and they were not a very efficient company. And they could be quite wasteful in terms of their operations. And the service wasn't that great. And I remember a Saturday Night Live, one of their fake commercials from AT&T saying, "We're the phone company, we don't care." Because you want to make a phone call, you have to use us. So because monopolies have all this inefficiency in it, we tend to have antitrust laws that do two things. They either break up monopolies and they prevent monopolies from forming and prevent collusion. Collusion is when companies act together like a monopoly. And this pretty much came from microeconomics, and we had the first antitrust laws ever passed anywhere in the world. And the first one is the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. And this did two things. It has two sections. Section 1, every contract, combination in the form of a trust or otherwise, or a conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce among several states or with foreign nations is hereby declared to be illegal. This talks about collusion. This is where companies work together, form together a cartel. And so they limit competition. It could be things like price fixing. Everyone agrees to charge the same price. It could be everyone agrees to limit output. That's what OPEC does. OPEC limits the amount of oil they produce. Each nation is given a quota on how much oil they can produce. So this could be maybe companies who are producing, say, steel in America. They collude together, form a cartel, and they lower output to have the price go up. They could divide the market up into different sections. Say you have 4 plumbers who work in Rancho. They can divide the market up into 4 sections, so there's no competition. You get a phone call from customers in your section. You answer them and go to their house. If you get a call from a customer in another plumber section, you say, "I'm busy, I can't get there in time," but you refer this plumber there who will show up at your house. And so they can divide the market, and they can therefore avoid competition. And then section 2, it talks about monopolies. And every person who shall monopolize or attempt to monopolize, combine or conspire with any other person or persons who monopolize any part of trade, again, is illegal. Now, as laws are pretty general in how they're written, it really depends on how they're applied through the court system. And so the courts have pretty much decided that it's not a crime to be a monopoly. It really is how you become a monopoly or have monopoly power. If you become a monopoly or have monopoly power because you're colluding on fixing prices or you're not allowing competitors to compete, then that's usually going to be illegal. But if you become a monopoly or get monopoly power based on just doing a good job, I mean, Walmart has a lot of complaints about it, but Walmart does provide low prices to its customers. And so even Walmart now dominates the retail market in many areas. They have been allowed to do so because, again, they are not anti-consumer. They provide consumers with low prices. So really, it depends on how these laws are applied that really matters. It also varies from administration. So if you usually a Democratic administration, Democratic Party, will enforce antitrust laws more so than Republican administrations who tend to be more business friendly. And Democrats tend to be more consumer friendly. Another law that was passed in 1914 was called the Clayton Antitrust Act, and this did quite a few things. It prohibited many activities if they were going to lessen competition enough. So exclusive sales contracts whereby a producer would deal with the retailer if the retailer agreed not to sell any of the producer's competitors' goods, and that's the case of Kodak I talked about, where Kodak would not allow any other competitor's film to be sold by these stores. That is anti-competitive. That's anti-consumer. And those kind of contracts would tend to be looked poorly on by the courts. Interlocking directorates in competing corporations. These are your board of directors for corporations, and you cannot, under the Clayton Act, it's illegal for board of directors in competing companies to sit on each other's boards. And so, for example, if you're a board of director on General Motors, you would not be allowed to be a board of director on Ford. Why so? Because if you have the same board of directors, they can act pretty much as one company, as a monopoly. Price discrimination, whereby firms would demand lower prices from supplies in order to drive their competitors out of business. That would be Walmart. Walmart does that. It's actually legal according to the law, the written part of the Clayton Act, this section of it. But again, it's based on the courts. The courts say that if you were to do that and then you would turn around and charge really high prices to your competitors, to your customers, then the courts might say that's not allowed. But Walmart, they don't do that. Walmart does force other retailers to sell to them at low prices, but then they pass those low prices on to their customers. So again, it depends on how the courts enforce these things. It's like, for example, the speed limit. The speed limit on the 210 freeway is, 65 miles per hour. Do people go 70? Yes. Are they stopped by the police? No. So you can break the law if you don't break it too much. That's sort of the same kind of idea with anti-laws. So how far you can push the laws before the government is going to crack down on you. Mergers and consolidation, and whereby competition is substantially lessened, is not allowed. Again, substantially. How substantial is substantially? And so, for example, is any merger not allowed between competitors? And the courts have said no. Mergers that would lower competition a lot, the government comes in and says, no, you can't do that. Or if you do that, you have to do certain things. An example of that would be what happened actually in Southern California. Back in 2014, a merger was taking place between Albertsons and Safeway, which is Vons down in Southern California. And what the government did was that they were worried there's going to lose a lot of competition here. So if you have like maybe 3 stores in one part of town, and 2 of them are Albertsons, one's a Vons, and they merge together to have one company, then you don't have any competition in that area. And so what the government did is the government said, we're going to allow the merger to take place if you sell off about 140 stores in areas where there would be less competition to a third party after the merger is completed. And so what happened was in 2014 and 2015, a supermarket chain up in Washington State called Haggens came down here and bought up most of those stores. And during about the summer of 2015, they opened those stores. And in about a month, they were gone. So apparently customers didn't like Haggens down here. I heard their prices were higher. I walked into one. I didn't buy anything. I walked into one, and it seemed like a nice store. It seemed like they had a lot of good supplies there. But there weren't that many customers, and I guess customers didn't like those stores, and so they pulled out about a month later. Lawsuits took place. They sued Albertsons. They said Albertsons wasn't truthful about certain things. I'm not sure about the details. But all I know is that Haggens moved out, and then Albertsons came back in and bought most of the stores back up again. So they tried to get competition to come in the supermarket area. They did for about a month, but then we went back to where we were. And so now we have less competition. And the Clayton Act also said that labor unions and agricultural cooperatives were exempt from antitrust laws. Kind of interesting, with the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first cases were applied against labor unions, which was not the intent of the law. And then agricultural cooperatives were allowed because farming business has these wide swings in supply and demand, and therefore it was felt that they should be exempt from these laws and allow them to try to work together to avoid farmers going out of business. And so you would have your cooperatives would be things like Sunmade, Raisins, Ocean Spray, Cranberry. We have Blue Diamond Almonds. They're all cooperative where they can market their products together under the brand name of Blue Diamond Almonds. And again, that is allowed. So this really applies to non-labor unions and agricultural cooperatives. Is pretty much where antitrust laws apply. Another interesting case is baseball. Baseball is exempt from antitrust laws based on a court case that took place back in, I think, the 1920s. But football is not. And basketball is not, for whatever reason. And then in 1914, another act was passed. It was the Federal Trade Commission Act, 1914. And I'll come back to that with the next part.